In June 2015, Wilfrid Laurier University entered into an agreement to raise 22 Prime Minister statues on the grounds of our Waterloo campus to celebrate Canada's 150th anniversary. A statue of Sir John A Macdonald soon appeared. Kim and I had discussed our disgust, with Kim saying, as she later wrote in her op-ed in the Toronto Star, that when she heard about it, she wanted to, quote, climb up on one of those chairs and place a noose around my neck in protest, a reference to Macdonald's role in Louis Riel's 1885 executions. Discussions and plans ensued. On October 30th, 2015, right before Halloween, Kim and I organized a performance protest in front of the Macdonald statue, which was by that point in the quad at Laurier's Waterloo campus. We started in the way that we'd been taught, with ceremony as we smudged and offered prayer, dressed in Halloween costume prison stripes as Big Bear and Poundmaker, two Cree men wrongly convicted and imprisoned after the 1885 rebellion, as it's been called in textbooks. We handed out candy to passers-by with historical facts about Macdonald's legacy for Indigenous peoples. For example, that while Macdonald unified the country, he was responsible for hanging and imprisoning Indigenous men. Macdonald's government banned Indigenous ceremonies and practices like the potlatch and the Sundance. Macdonald's government used rations to subjugate and control Indigenous communities, starving them into submission and signing treaty. Macdonald's national policy, meant to unify Canada, required the dispossession of Indigenous lands. And Macdonald's dreams of a railway to join the from sea to shining sea ran straight through Indigenous lands. We sat stoically in the fading afternoon light, much like we did here today. Kim's son, Rajan, then joined us playing Métis reels while we danced around Sir John A, and I awkwardly played the spoons. So why did we do this? In my letter to the PM, the Prime Minister's Statues Special Advisory Committee, on behalf of my Indigenous Studies colleagues in December 2015, I outlined a few of our points that refer back to our understandings of Dibaajamowanan. Commemoration, such as the Statues Project, require a balance of suppression and emphasis of historical facts, and it nearly always privileges elite voices. If the university proposes to commemorate nation building, as then President Blau's letter indicated to the university community, we must remember that dispossession of Indigenous lands and peoples was necessary to facilitate railways, expansion, and settlement. If we are commemorating these policies that are said to have made Canada, quote, one of the best countries in the world today, this was another reason for the statues, we are also tacitly commemorating this dispossession. Take, for example, an excerpt from the plaque on Macdonald's statue, which read, quote, John A. Macdonald was regarded as an outstanding leader. He rallied support for expansion across the West and urged British Columbia to enter Confederation by promising a railway to the Pacific, completed in 1885. Macdonald established the Northwest Mounted Police, now the RCMP, to provide order and security for Western settlers. Despite having to resign as a result of the Pacific Scandal in 1873, Macdonald was re-elected and a much-loved leader. This interpretation willfully ignores what happened to the people who were already living in the Northwest. Indeed, Macdonald's expansion across the West came as a result of the dispossession of Indigenous peoples of our lands. The Northwest Mounted Police, which provided order and security for Western settlers, was a direct attempt to extinguish Indigenous legal and marital systems and to extend Canadian sovereignty to to use the terminology of the time, a wild and savage West. The railway, for which he risked his political career, ran through Indigenous lands and was completed in the same month Louis Riel was hanged. Macdonald was a controversial figure in Quebec too, and there were protests that arose after Riel's execution. Perhaps he was a much-loved leader in English, Protestant, urban Canada, but that excludes Francophone, Indigenous, and immigrant perspectives, not to mention women who could not vote until at least 1918, and First Nations women couldn't vote if they were status Indians until 1960. Of course, as a scholar, I'm aware that there are a variety of perspectives on any issue, and my point is not that Prime Ministers of Canada were not important historical figures and that Confederation is not an important historical event. Of course they are. But they are important to different groups of people for different reasons. Some may see in these statues reflections of themselves and feel that they represent a positive vision for Canada. Our point as the Ji'ige Historical Society is that for Indigenous peoples and many Canadians, they will be reminders of dispossession, racism, gender inequality, and genocide. The end result of the committee's meetings, as many of you may know, was that the statues project was cancelled at Laurier, and Sir John A, along with his colleagues, found a fitting home at Castle Kilbride, which was the home of James Livingston, a Canadian Member of Parliament and a flax and linseed oil businessman. It was designated a National Historic Site of Canada in March 1994 and is currently a tourism and museum site in Wilmot Township outside of Waterloo. The home of a former MP was completed a mere 11 years after Confederation in 1878, and I imagine that our grandmothers would have been as welcome there as they were at the Charlottetown or Quebec conferences. So to conclude, I'm going to show a film written by Kim about our first outing to protest the statues. Our society still has a lot of work to do, and we are delighted that we have a new partner in indigenization in Brittany. We continue to do this work like we are doing today because, as Kim will tell you in the video you are about to see, there are still disparities in, quote, who gets the bridges, who's on the summit, who gets celebrated, and who gets erased. Miigwech.